Alright, so today we are testing the RTX 3060 in Dead Island 2. Now this game released over the weekend and I haven't had much time to play it yet. I played maybe an hour or two, but here we are. So just before we start the benchmark, I just want to show you something very funny. Just look at the frame time graph there. It's just this specific spot. If you move your mouse just a little bit higher, it normalizes. If you move past that point, like that's just very strange. If I move like 3 steps back, the frame time graph normalizes, but as soon as I stand in this particular spot, it just goes haywire. So the reason why I'm standing in this spot is because this game is very gory, and I don't want this video to be flagged by YouTube for showing excessive violence within the first few seconds. Right, so we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, and today we're pairing this GPU with a 12400 CPU from Intel, which is a 6-core 12-thread CPU, and we've got 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 MHz CL16 memory. Right, let's get right to it. Right, so we just lowered the resolution down to 1080p, and as you can see, that frame time graph is still doing it. Anyway, well, this is very sensitive. So as you can see, it's a pretty gory game. And I just want to explain one thing. We've got MSI Afterburner in the top left-hand corner there. And for some reason, when I record at 1080p, it just does not look that great. Right, so you might see some additional black edges around the numbers within the YouTube video. Unfortunately, there's nothing that I can do about it at the moment. I'm recording this using an RX 6600 XT just to test using OBS with a 4K capture card, and that's just one of the drawbacks that I saw with my current settings at the moment. Anyway, so this is at 1080p Ultra, and as you can see, the game looks pretty good. There's nothing that I can complain too much about when it comes to the graphics. It's extremely gory. There are some traversal stutters. As you can see, you're moving around. You can see the frame time graph just go a little bit crazy, but it's not really that noticeable in game. Right, so the frame time graph becomes a little bit more inconsistent, but the gameplay still feels fine. Let's just take care of this zombie. Got a nice sword which attacks quite quickly, and but these zombies just keep on respawning anyway. I think I mean, I killed all of them earlier and they are all still here. Right, so you can see that the frame time, or the frame rate, actually fluctuates quite a lot. Outside here we are getting 110 frames per second, and inside I saw a jump up to 180 frames per second, which is quite good. This is on the Ultra preset, so that definitely a pretty good gaming experience. As you can see, 170, 180 frames per second inside. So there's not a lot to render, but it's still pretty good. Right, so even 100 frames per second overlooking burnt LA, definitely not terrible. I don't think I'm going to be testing that shimmering is that's terrible though. Not sure if it'll come across in the YouTube video as clearly. I mean, if we just look at it from a distance, I'm not using FSR or anything. This is just the Ultra preset using the temporal AA that comes with the game. Sure, we can lower that down to FXAA, but yeah, this is not ideal. So the game does support FSR, it doesn't support DLSS, unfortunately, but there we go. So I'm going to be testing next at 1080p high, and then we'll move over to 1440p. Right, so you can see the settings, Ultra preset. One thing that I did change, I mean, this is enabled. Not sure if there's actually a big performance difference with this enabled or disabled. Just one thing that I did change in the display is actually my field of view. I made it 90 and I removed the motion blur because that's just useless. Alright, let's go to 1080p high. I think we should get around 120 around here, I believe. Alright, 120 frames per second, right? So that's pretty good. You can get a very high refresh rate experience with the 3060 at 1080p high. All right, let's just do the same benchmark run as we just did. So I'm choosing this specific location because it's pretty bright outside. There you can see Hollywood is burning. It's pretty bright outside, so you can clearly see what's happening, and inside it can become pretty dark, but majority of this run is outside, and then we just have a small inside section as well. One thing that I find pretty strange is that this guy has got a lawnmower here and no grass whatsoever. I haven't seen any grass except maybe this little portion here. Maybe that's what he cuts with his lawnmower. It might be the correct width, but other than that, there's just a lot of bricks and a lot of garden, no grass. Right, so as you can see outside, getting 120 frames per second. Inside, that goes up to 140. In this area should be maybe higher, maybe 200 frames per second, almost 190 frames per second. So that's these zombies definitely respawn. So, but that's good because then we can actually get some gameplay footage in here as well. They're just damaging my sword at the moment. Now you can see there that the 1% lows and the 0.1% lows, they're not terrible. They are not really close to the average frame rate, but I haven't really noticed a lot of stuttering that bother me, or bother me too much, I should say. Alright, so this was at 1080p high and a very good experience so far. Alright, let's move over to 1440p. Alright, we're now at 1440p, still on the Ultra preset, and you can see here that we're getting around 40 to 50 frames per second less than at 1080p. Don't think I can get that side. Looking out over this area, getting around 80 frames per second, which is still pretty good considering this is the Ultra preset at 1440p with a mid-range GPU from last gen. So definitely still a very playable experience this. We can always lower the detail down to high. I didn't see that big a jump when I tested earlier, just testing the different presets before I started recording. Going from ultra to high netted us a few frames per second, but not that much. So we'll be testing at high as well as medium at 1440p. Right, so outside, once again, 80 frames per second. The game definitely looks good, the reflections, the lighting, etc. There's no ray tracing, so this is just whatever lighting method they use. It looks pretty good in this game. Nothing to complain about here. Except maybe my sword fighting skills. If there is some screen tearing, that's because I'm using a external capture card that doesn't support variable refresh rate, and it's anything above 60 frames per second would show some tearing. Alright, so I just want to see this specific spot where we got almost 200 frames per second previously. Getting around 110, just above 100 frames per second. So not close to the 200 frames per second we saw earlier, but that's still fine. Alright, so that was at 1440p Ultra. Now let's go down to the high preset. Alright, we're now at 1440p high, and as you can see, we're sitting at around 90 frames per second. Well, 80 to 90. So we gained 10 to 15 frames per second here. Still a very good looking game, still a very good experience this. Maybe we can get 140 frames per second here now. Still just 120, that's pretty good. Right, but just have a look at that frame time graph as I traverse through the area here. It does increase quite a bit, or does become a lot more inconsistent. I'm not going through the usual run that I previously did, but I just wanted to see what the traversal stutter looks like. You can see it smooths out and then it just starts again, but it doesn't affect our lows too much. We are sitting with the 1% lows of 58 and 0.1% lows of 53. Right, so it's still pretty good, and as I said, it's not noticeable really. You might see it in fast action moving scenes, but just running around, it's really not that noticeable. All right, let's just try the medium preset and then we'll move over to 4K. All right, we're now at 1440p medium, and our frame rate went up another 20 to 30 frames per second, which is pretty good. I think if you play at 1440p and you want a high refresh rate experience, or close to one anyway, 1440p medium might be your go-to setting. I mean, the game still looks pretty good. It's not the best looking game, definitely not, but it's definitely not one of the worst looking games either. Right, in this area, getting 160 frames per second. That's pretty good at 1440p. My sword is not going to make it through the next few benchmark runs, unfortunately. You can see then the bottom right hand corner, the durability, so it's probably not going to make it. Luckily I've got a pull stick, whatever you call it, and got a few burnt timbers, so I'll be fine. Alright, so this was at 1440p medium. I'm going to go to 1440p ultra and then just enable FSR quality to see what kind of frames we are getting. Right, we're back on the ultra preset, and here you can see we're on the quality preset when it comes to FSR. So we're getting around 90 frames per second, which is more or less the same as what we had at 1440p high. I'll just have a look at the objects in the distance. You can see quite a bit of shimmering there, the glass windows there, and let's go to this balcony again and just look at the roof. Right, I don't think FSR is going to be better looking than native. I mean, just look at the shimmering there, the artifacting, definitely not ideal. It seems to be a bit worse with FSR, but native TAA just doesn't seem to be much better either. So I think we're getting at least 100 frames per second. Yeah, that's not what I think. I think if you want to play this game, rather just use the 1440p high or medium presets. You don't have to use upscaling for that to get a decent frame rate and experience. All right, now it's time for 4K. Right, we're now on 4K on the Ultra preset, and the shimmering seems to be a lot better, but that's because it's at 4K now, so the anti-aliasing is a lot better because it's a higher resolution, obviously. But at native, no FSR, we're getting around 40 to 50 frames per second, depending on which area we are. It's definitely not terrible. I mean, I wouldn't play this game like this, but that's where FSR can definitely help us. But to be able to get like 40 frames per second on a 3060 at 4K in a very new title is pretty impressive, I must say. This game is, it seems to be pretty decently optimized. Sure, there's quite a few bugs and glitches, etc. But the performance seems to be pretty okay. The loading times are also non-existent. It loads very quickly. Alright, so at 4K Ultra, not the best experience, though. One of the better looking experiences, obviously, but 40 frames per second for a first person type of game, definitely not worth it. All right, let's see what happens at high. Right, we're now at 4K high, and I don't really see much of an improvement here. We're still sitting around 40 to 50 frames per second. The game still looks pretty good. At 4K, definitely looks very good, actually. Remember, this is still native. We're not using FSR. I actually felt quite a bit of an increase in the input latency during that scene over there, where there was quite a lot of frame time inconsistencies. So it does affect the input latency every now and again, but overall it's definitely not the end of the world. But once again, 40-50 frames per second, definitely not ideal. Right, so let's just kill these zombies. Let's break my sword. Okay, that was expected but unexpected. Now let's just see if we can get a close to 60 frames per second experience, at least at the medium setting. Right, we're now at 4K on the medium preset, and this is definitely more like it. Getting 60 frames per second, overlooking the pool here. It's strange that there's no blood in the pool. They are definitely eating somebody there. Are they drowning? Can they drown? I don't know what that icon means. Maybe they're drowning. Anyway, between 60 and 70 frames per second. Definitely playable at 4K. This is the medium preset. Once again, it still looks pretty good. It's not like The Last of Us, where the texture detail just becomes so blurry that you can't really make out anything. And getting around 60 frames per second, yeah. Very impressive for a 3060, I must say. But this just shows that, I mean, this game was in development for like 10 years. So maybe they spent quite a lot of time with optimization. If they did, it's definitely visible or noticeable. Right, even in this specific area here, we're still getting 60 frames per second. Right, so if you want to play at 4K, I think 4K medium with a native resolution might be your best bet, as it looks pretty good and it plays pretty good as well. Right, but let's see. I'm not going to test 4K Ultra with FSR. Let's go to 4K High and start playing with FSR. Right, this is at 4K high with the FSR set to quality, and this seems to give us a 60 frames per second experience as well, or close to one anyway. We kind of messed up our numbers, so let's just reset the numbers there. So getting almost 60 frames per second, it's definitely still playable, although I'd prefer it to be a little bit more consistent, a little bit closer to 60 more often, or locked at 60 even. And even if you do use a frame rate limiter and try to lock it to 60, it'll still drop below that, right? So it's not going to be a perfect 60 frames per second experience. Right, I've got a city club here, so I don't mind breaking that over these zombies. But this definitely takes a... Oh, it actually did break that quickly. Hello? Apparently we have to use our fists now. This is not going well for me. This range actually does quite a lot of damage, especially if you can hit headshots. And there's my pool cue that I spoke about earlier. I can't fit that one. Anyway, doesn't matter. So getting almost 60 frames per second, but not quite. So let's just drop the FSR quality down to balanced. All right, we are now on FSR Balanced, and we didn't gain that much really. I saw it drop down below 60 frames per second. So definitely not, still not going to be a perfect 60 frames per second experience. It might be, maybe it was just still loading in some textures. No, there we go, 55 frames per second. Once again, definitely not the end of the world, but definitely, okay, that was quite strange. My mouse just jumped quite a bit there. Now, it's not the end of the world, as I said. We're getting close to 60 frames per second, so the occasional dip below it is definitely not going to bother anybody too much if you're aiming for 60 frames per second. But I just thought that if we go down to balanced, we'd actually be able to hit that 60 frames per second at all times. All right, that didn't seem like the case, so maybe, I mean, we can definitely still lower the FSR quality, but at that point you might just lose some crisp detail. So if you plan on playing at 4K, maybe use the medium preset at native, as we saw that gave us a pretty good experience. But I mean, we're a benchmarking channel, so let's move the FSR down to performance. Alright, and for the first time we are actually seeing a pretty big increase in the frame rate. We dropped down to FSR Performance here. Once again, the game looks pretty okay, still definitely playable and still visually appealing. But I mean, that's just my opinion, right? If you don't think the game looks good at these settings, then just don't play at these settings, right? But the reflections, the blood, everything, it just looks pretty good. Right, in this specific area, still getting 80 frames per second. Now let's see in our high frame rate area, 90 frames per second, and these stupid zombies are here again. This was quite fun the first 2 or 3 times, but now it's just become a bit of a burden. Let's see if where's my range? There we go. This might make it a little bit quicker if I can actually just hit them. And you can then stomp on their heads if they're not. Okay, didn't want to do it there. Anyway, we're getting above 60 frames per second at all times, it seems. I didn't keep an eye on the frame rate counter there. So 4K with FSR Performance seems to do it for us, or 4K in medium settings. Right, this was at 4K high with the FSR performance mode, and definitely a playable experience. I just want to have a look at the shimmering with the roof there. We saw that it was a lot reduced with going up to 4K, and it still seems better than native 1440p at least. Although from this distance, it's just a bit of a mess. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.